when people were talking about the description of this immense light, and it knew everything about them, and it was so loving and powerful and funny and like every quality that you can imagine, and how people, who were basically clinically dead were talking about how it was more vivid and real compared to normal life. And I found this really intriguing that these were modern people. This wasn't ancient, philosophers. These are people, everyday people, and the medical records support this, and that when people come back with after effects, and I thought this is actually more powerful, or the kind of thing I'm looking for, than even the religions, because this is like there's evidence here and there's kind of a mystery here in terms of how does it all work, like what's the mechanism, and I remember the first time I came across these accounts, all the feeling of, let's say, suicide or whatnot, it went away, because it was like, if this is real and it felt real, then that means that we do have a purpose here, that we're not a random accident, and that there is a higher power. It's not a religious thing. You don't have to be a part of a club. It's for everyone.
Welcome to Souls on Tap. I'm Julianne Vaughn.
And I'm Jennifer Cross.
Today on our show, we are honored to welcome Ned Matinnia, a pioneering researcher who has dedicated much of his life's passion to studying the extraordinary phenomenon of near-death experiences and mediumship, and how the two actually intertwine. Through years of interviews, data collection, and cross-cultural analysis, Ned has helped bring scientific rigor to a subject that touches the deepest questions of life, death, and consciousness. We'll explore what he has discovered, the patterns that emerge, and how these experiences may transform our understanding of the human spirit. Welcome, Ned.
Hi, guys. I'm so excited.
Happy. Happy to have you.
How's the weather in California?
Well, I'm actually happy that it's almost raining, and it's actually helpful here because we haven't had like a good soaking in a long time. So I'm looking up at the skylight, and we have the clouds that are coming in. And within like a half an hour or an hour, we should get like a good downpour.
Good.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been super dry here, and then we got some rain. So, and I'm like you, I welcomed the rain. So Ned, so much. We have so many places to go. So let's start with what originally drew you to study such a fascinating subject as near-death experiences and mediumship as well, because really this conversation is about how the two work simultaneously.
Well, in my life, I had a painful childhood, and I know a lot of people have painful childhoods, but in my life, I didn't have a healthy, supportive family. I didn't have close friends, or even a best friend. And I felt like an alien on Earth. And so I had a hard time relating to the other kids on the playground. Oftentimes, kids would be focused on the latest game or movies or whatnot. And actually, I kind of had a sheltered childhood as well. And so in our home, we didn't have cable television until my parents separated, and so which happened at the end of elementary school. And so I was often out of the loop on everything. But in that whole process of having a childhood which is painful, and not having any support system, my parents would often fight and argue, and my mom left my dad at the end of fifth grade, which I actually supported her in that, because he was truly abusive. And so But after that happened, uh, you know, even even in her home afterwards or her apartment, I, we basically numbed ourselves on television and fast food and junk food. Like it would be school and then that, and then I would often stay up until like 3 or 4 a.m. With video games, and so I got hooked on all that. I didn't really have a healthy or happy childhood, and in that whole process, at least what's interesting is that I didn't have a religious childhood either, which in a way I see it almost as a good thing in terms of I didn't have anything imposed on me. Um, my dad is a scientist and electrical engineer, and so, I kind of had that perspective on life too. He encouraged us to be in science, and and so in that process, though, when I was in high school and I learned about self-loathing because I wanted to be fitter and taller and popular, and I was the opposite of all those things. And so, I thought about suicide. And before I got to actually planning all of that, in a more serious way, I thought, well, there has to be some kind of answers or some kind of wisdom out there. I wonder if there is. And so I wasn't familiar with religion, like a whole lot of it. Like I knew that in church, every church had their own beliefs, and there were a lot of dogmas and just kind of hypocrisy in church. In I saw how in science also, over time, I used to believe that everything a scientist would say was accurate. Like I loved Bill Nye, and I loved Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan and all those. But then over time, I realized uh, in the process of learning about near-death experiences and mediums and even astrology, I realized there's a huge blind spot in science. And so just as religion has its own dogmas and blind spots, science also has its own areas which are either off limits or its own Santa Clauses. And so a Santa Claus is anything that a lot of people are believing that isn't true. And so, in terms of for science, a big one is that there is no soul, there is no afterlife, there is no God. It's all just make believe. And as opposed to a true scientist who just says, I don't know, I'm open to evidence.
Right.
A lot of them will go beyond that and say, oh no, we do know it's impossible. And they basically will make up their mind about that and preach that, even in universities and schools and scientific forums. And so it was a process that when I was in high school, I thought about a way out. And then I thought, well, before I do that, I'm curious, is there any meaning or purpose? And I came across astrology on accident, like in a more serious way than what's in like an entertainment magazine. I came across a website, and it was like ancient text, and it was about astrology, and I thought how interesting, like it talked about the wise men of the past and the ancient mystics, and I was all intrigued. Like I'm not the kind of person to just believe, but I was curious, and so I started to read, and so in that process, as an example for astrology, I was like, I wonder which of these 12 signs is mine. And then so I read all of them, and then I started asking everyone their birthdays and observing everyone. And so in that process, I was like, there is something here with astrology, and I put that on its own shelf. And then eventually I came across in college, I took a class on world religions, and we learned about the Eastern religions, the Western religions, and so from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all the way to Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism, Confucianism, and I appreciated learning a lot of the wisdom in a lot of them, and I was trying to find any common threads. And I found it
Excuse me,
interesting.
Ned, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask you because this is important. So, studying the world's great religions, did you read or study any Joseph Campbell?
I think a little bit the archetypes, right? And so he talks about how there's a set of archetypes which are in every culture and in every
Every so
story.
when you were talking about the common denominators there that you find, that's what he had the ability to do. He was able to show uh, who stole from who, why we are who we are today in terms of our philosophies and our religions. So I just so for those of you viewers out there, if you do have questions about great religions, be sure and look up Joseph Campbell because he's imperative to understanding how that all works. Okay, sorry about that.
And and so in that process, I found it interesting how underneath a lot of the rules and dogma in the religions, a lot of them they talked about the importance of compassion or the golden rule, and almost all of them have that core clause
Mm-hmm.
or proverb,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the Eastern religions, they talked about how there's like a higher power or like a source of everything that's a mystery that you can't put a label on it. It's beyond any comprehension. It's beyond any. It's like a bliss and it's like a mystery. And I found that all intriguing, and about how common meditation is advocated in the Eastern religions. Um, uh, and so I found a lot of answers in that. However, it wasn't until I came across uh, someone either mentioned in an internet forum or something, but Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And I was like, wow, that's interesting because how could there be a life after life?
How old were
And
you about this time?
I think I was in a college.
Ah,
And so um and so I ordered it and I started reading it. And I remember when people were talking about the description of this immense light, and it knew everything about them, and it was so loving and powerful and funny and like every quality that you can imagine, and how people, who are basically clinically dead were talking about how it was more vivid and real compared to normal life. And I found this really intriguing that these were modern people. This wasn't ancient, philosophers. These are people, everyday people, and
It's 12:30.
the medical records support this, and that when people come back with after effects, and I thought this is actually more powerful or the kind of thing I'm looking for than even the religions, because this is like there's evidence here and there's kind of a mystery here in terms of how does it all work, like what's the mechanism, um, you know, and I remember the first time I came across these accounts, all the feeling of, let's say, suicide or whatnot, it went away because it was like, if this is real and it felt real, um, then that means A, that we do have a purpose here, that we're not a random accident, and that there is a higher power. It's not a religious thing. You don't have to be a part of a club. It's for everyone. And so I thought, well, okay, well, if I'm here, I might as well make the most of my time here, because it seems like when people are told it's not your time, you have to go back, you have a purpose, you have a mission, and it's like, well, I wonder what that mission is. And they talk about how important love is, and and all that. And I thought, well, what if I just use, as opposed to seeing my life as a waste of time, as just suffering and busy work, as I felt in school, I felt it was all a waste of time for nothing. Perhaps there is a reason, and we, you know, it's really about how we treat each other as opposed to trying to get a good job and money, enter the rat race. And I was turned off by all that. And that is part of the reason I thought about a way out, because I thought I don't want to continue high school the rest of my life. There has to be a reason I'm here that's bigger than that, or more heartfelt, or meaningful. And and that's why these experiences, they kind of showed me that. And then eventually I came across an advertisement for IANS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and they have a conference every year. It's over Labor Day weekend, and the first time I saw the advertisement, it was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I think I saw the website in like June, and it was to be in August, so I signed up immediately. And I'm in California, or at the time I was in Colorado, and I signed up and I got my airfare and hotel and everything because I was excited. Like, I'm going to actually meet people who have
Like-minded.
have these experiences in real life, and so as opposed to just an intellectual conference of like a lecturer who's up front just kind of explaining all the facts. It was like a family. It was like heartfelt and interesting, and like um I feel like I didn't have true friends until I came to IANS. And it's not just about IANS, I guess about until I met other experiencers who I could relate to, because for a lot of people, I have a lot of acquaintances and friends who are like that, but we can't go deep because either they're not really interested in what I'm interested in, or there isn't, it's kind of like there's a huge area which is blocked off. And with experiencers, they get you, and you get them, and it's a sense of, I call it like soul family. And I'm sure, you know, part of it is a lot of the reason that I felt stymied by a lot of people when I interact with them in in regular life is because a lot of people have their guards up in terms of, like, people are so guarded about, because others who try to take advantage of them or whatnot. Everyone kind of has a healthy sense of protection around them. But when a person has a near-death experience, it like it shows them how all those false masks, they get in the way of being authentic. And so when you meet experiencers at conferences who are just more authentic without all those barriers and whatnot, you feel like a true sense of being seen and appreciated for who you are, and vice versa. And so I think that is part of it too, because a lot of experiencers, once they get that awakening, or that of that wall either cracked or opened up, they basically have a hard time relating to everyone else who has that walls up, and they're like, I want to be around people who have that love or who are open to it. And so, in that process, I entered the NDE community, and that was in 2012 in Scottsdale. And then in 2013, with that inspiration, I thought, I was on Facebook, and I thought, I want a place to kind of store and consolidate this information, like articles and videos on YouTube. And so I created a group. I just called it Near Death Experiences, and I started posting.
On
And at the
Facebook?
time,
Was this Facebook?
yes, on Facebook, and it was in September 15th, 2013. And at that time, I didn't have many friends at all, or connections, and yet over time, over the years, that group became it's switched because it used to just be me posting articles and stuff. Other people, they started joining out of curiosity, and then it became first we had 5,000 people, and then 10,000, and then 50,000, then 100,000, and then over the years we're now at 275,000 members, and
And that puts you at the top, doesn't it? I think that you have the most members of any near-death experience.
It's up there, and so I've looked. There are some larger groups, but those larger groups are usually more open to like all the afterlife or just all spirituality. I intentionally always I want to keep it focused on NDEs, and so because I'm a member of a lot of those other ones too, but either oftentimes you get like the spammers or just kind of like I call them fluff posts, which aren't really. And so I try to keep the quality in my group up, and so it's more focused. And every one of the members we manually approve. It's not in some groups it's just open ended, and so people can join. A lot of them it could be bots or spammers, etc. We tried to keep that out, but in the group, I've met a lot of friends who attend the conferences, or I've seen at local talks. And the first time that I read Life After Life, and it was the turning point in my life of like, there is a reason there. And so this is really the reason I'm alive. Like I have a day job, I have other things, but like, what's my passion? Like, what am I proud of, or what makes my heart on fire? It's just getting the word out. Like this is the reason I'm here. And so, a lot of the friends I have made, and a lot of the things I have done, it's a kind of in honor of spirit, and this kind of leads into the mediumship. So, in 2012, I had my first mediumship reading, and I'm a scientist at heart, so I'm curious, and so I had it without any expectations or whatnot. I wanted to see what information would possibly come through, and if it was accurate, all that stuff. And my grandfather, who transitioned when I was, I think, 4 years old, was there, and he brought up one of my only memories of him, because we only met him. I only met him a few times because I grew up in California and he was in New Jersey, and so over Christmases and whatnot, over the holidays, we visited. And the only memory that I had of him, it was we went fishing in the pond over there, and we caught like a round flounder. And so I remember holding it up and everything. And so, and he mentioned that in the reading. And
wow.
And even though I hadn't thought about him since then, and yet, and he said that he's been kind of watching over me, especially as I've kind of had the struggles, and as I was kind of in depression, and kind of guiding me towards the path I was on, the healthier spiritual path. And there was some more information that also came through, and she told me that you're going to be helping so many people, and I was like, wow. And this is before the NDE group I started. But I just had a feeling that she was probably right. Like she probably doesn't tell this to everyone, but she said to me, "You're going to be helping so many people," and I felt, well, that makes me feel like I do have a purpose, and it makes me feel happy in my heart because my life is for something. And so it was really interesting how, in that process I learned about mediumship, and I felt that, yes, there is something in this which is real. And in in the years after, I've had some other ones, or I even attended it's called like a gallery where you have an audience, sometimes with hundreds of people, and there's a medium up front, and they will call on people. And if you've heard of um, Alison Dubois,
Uh-huh.
have you guys?
Yeah.
She's a famous medium. I think she's in Phoenix, and there's actually the a TV show. It was called Medium. Was all about her. And so I saw her at an event in Denver, in um, I, I think it was in that year, and I just remember in the audience we had like 100 or 200 people in this ballroom in the hotel, and I was observing, is there anything that's happening, like it, when you talk to skeptics, or you read the forums online, they'll often will talk about how that the person has the earpiece, and people are feeding them information, or all kinds of like
Yeah.
shenanigans are happening, and I didn't see any of that. And someone said that oftentimes the mediums, um, or their assistants will pass around a paper or a questionnaire. So ahead of time, everyone will kind of fill in information, and then they'll collect them all, and then, but none of that happened. It was just all natural. And I recall a lot of the tissues being passed around, and people tearing up at times because of how it touched on memories. And I just remember feeling kind of profoundly uh, moved. Like I recall there was a many uh, people who came through, and one of them, I think, the daughter was in the audience, and I think her parents had passed away in an accident, and her father, he raised, no, her grandfather, he raised her in Hawaii, and he would often watch her surf. And so that memory came through, and others as well. But I just um, remember these specific memories and details, and how healing they were, and how it wasn't just like a random guess or chance. And so in that process, I was really moved. And every time I see a reading uh, uh, by a medium, I'm usually impressed. It isn't about me or just about that person. I'm impressed because it's like it's restoring a faith, or knowing that there is like magic in life, and there is like
Magic. That's a great word for it.
and there is love, because oftentimes I see, and a lot of people, we see the news, and we see like in traffic, and everyone's all pissed off at each other, and and when you're surrounded in that energy, like I was, when I was in high school before all this, I was cynical. I thought humanity was barbaric, and I thought, what's everyone doing here? This is a waste of time. This is just, we're all bickering all the time. And in these experiences of the mediums, and in the near-death experiences, it was like there's a there's almost like the adults in the room, or there's a higher power above all of us, because I feel like all of us are kind of often like children. And it's like, okay, I love that because I want to talk to these guides more, or the higher power more, like the people who actually are
Channeling.
are are intelligent and can help us.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, a lot of near-death experiences, they talk about how there are ETs and there are other civilizations
Right.
who want to help us.
Yeah.
And so it's a whole doorway because before any of this, I was open to ETs, but I never, I saw any evidence about it. But the more that when people who are completely even not interested in aliens or anything, or were raised in a religion who taught that was all evil or impossible, and then they have an NDE, and then they meet other beings, and their whole perspective is all changed. I take notice of that, and so anyway.
Can I ask you? So it's so interesting to me that so people have these NDEs, for example, and they come out mostly with epiphanies like, oh my goodness, now my life is going in this direction, and now my purpose has changed, and now I have a purpose, and now my belief system has changed. Like profound changes for overall is what I see. And I find it so beautiful that you did not have to have an NDE to have these changes in yourself. All you did was pay attention to what was around you in a scientific way, mostly, it sounds like. And you came up with, okay, this stuff is around, this stuff is changing people, and this stuff is changing me. And then the whole thing with the medium kind of put the spirituality cap on it to solidify the fact that now you have a purpose and now you're going to do this and this is real. And so I just think that so many people should do what you did and pay attention to all this information that you are putting together, and so many other people are also not at maybe the level that you are, but it's life-changing for so many different people, all the information that's coming through. And I have a question for you in that, what are the main themes that you have found that, some people go through life reviews, some people don't, but their lives are still changed. What are the main themes that come through after people have NDEs that are affecting them and so many other people?
A lot of it, it probably may sound overused, but it's love with a capital L, or just the whole world,
Yeah, all caps.
word in caps.
Right.
Because love, we hear that a lot, and yet it is, if you ask, a bunch of experiencers, what's the most important thing, and almost all of them will say it's love. And then the question is, well, what does that mean? And so in my mind, it means, when I've seen time after time experiencers who used to be a bully, or let's say a banker who was, ruthless in terms of the, economics, and who didn't have any empathy for anyone else. It was all about themselves. And they have an NDE and they change all that. Like on a dime matters, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean,
I saw that.
And so this is a huge, because for me, and a lot of smart or powerful people who are now in government or in heads of corporations, a lot of them are really shrewd, are really smart and cunning and calculating. And a lot of them, even if they may sometimes go to church on the weekend or say that they're a part of a religion or something, a lot of them, like, to them and to how I used to think, kindness was just a nice idea. Like, you can be kind if you want, but that's just kind of a nice, it's almost like a fairy tale, or it's almost like a comforting thing for some people at some times. But in reality, life is ruthless, and you have to be shrewd, and you have to
Right.
be look out for yourself. And there's a lot of that out there. And that is why a lot of the conflicts are happening, economically and in wars, because of that whole thinking.
It's ego, just huge ego.
Ego and ignorance, a lack of realizing that there is a higher power for real. There is an afterlife for real. I say for real because a lot of them, they kind of have if they're in church, they hear about there's an afterlife, and so they kind of will even kind of think that they think there's an afterlife, but they don't actually act as if they truly
Yeah.
understand what that means. And so, it's the message that love is the most important, and that includes, like in Eastern traditions, it's called ahimsa, or non-violence. You don't want to hurt anything. You don't want to hurt an animal if you don't have to. If you're starving, you have to eat. You can, kill an animal, but there's a way of doing it to honor them and without any suffering, etc. And so, it's that whole thing is also that we're all in this together. All these beliefs, all these religious sects of, like, you are in this camp or in this camp, or you are a Baptist or a Catholic, or you are a Hindu or a Muslim, or the chosen people are over here and everyone else isn't. Like, these are all just artificial, and even borders. And so, it's important on a practical level for a country to have a border, but ultimately, in the higher powers perspective, it doesn't matter what country or nationality anyone is. We're all equal across the whole world. So that is, I would say, the biggest thing, and that what we do matters. And so, for so long, I went into confusion circles because there's a lot of new age thinking, which is almost like, well, everything is happening according to higher plan, and so therefore there is no free will really, and so just do whatever you want. And it's almost like there are so many beliefs like that out there, and I used to get confused because I thought, well, if everything is happening according to plan all the time, then what's the point of putting any effort into anything?
Right.
And for so long, I was kind of in this kind of confusion, and it's a lot to process, because I'm sure for a lot of people who are listening on the spiritual path, you are taken for an evolutionary journey of, like, you know, um, starting in our consumerist materialism, which is, a lot of people are in that, and then, like, oh, there is spiritual experience, and these are real, and then like these other steps in the whole journey of like, well, um, is there free will? Is everything just happening? Um, it's a whole confusing.
The conundrum it is. And, I think that's part of the journey, is like getting answers, but with the caveat that that answer is going to change. That's what I have discovered. Just when you think you have it, you're like, okay, I'm good with this. I got my answer. I'm happy with this. This is great. And then before I know it, something else comes along and just blows it all to hell. But I have to share a funny anecdote to what you were talking about, Ned. I had unexpected but major surgery in April, and it was open heart surgery.
Wow.
And I was, for some reason, very much trusting the team of cardiologists and surgeons I had there. I was like not worried at all. It's just still a little bit in shock, but not worried. So I was really preparing myself for a near death experience. Like I really wanted to have one. I was really pumped, right? So I wake up and nothing. I'm like, damn, I did not have a near death experience and I really wanted to have one. So I was talking to Jennifer about it because Jennifer and I are both do introspective hypnosis. And she said, I really think that we should do a session on you and maybe figure out what it is that was going on while you were being operated on. So we did that. And even though I didn't have a near death experience, I very clearly went to the place that was very familiar to me that apparently I go to all the time when I'm sleeping at night, which was Beyond the Veil. And I saw my family, and et cetera, et cetera. But the funniest thing, so a couple of years ago, you were talking about mediums. There is a famous individual out of New Zealand. His name is Blair Styra, and he channels to Bosch, who happens to be a 1500, I think he's 16th century BC Sumerian, and whose name is Tabash. And so I usually have a session with him about once a year. And a couple of years ago, he looked up at me and he said, "Oh, your mother's here." My mother had passed on. And I was shocked because my mother was ever the intellectual, academic intellectual. A lot of what you see around me is thanks to my mom. So she rejected a lot of the metaphysical, spiritual world. And so I was shocked that of all the people, she would be the one to come through. And I told her, I said, why? Why are you here? She said, why are you so surprised? And I said, well, because, we just kind of did this a little bit throughout our life together. And I said, but I do want to ask you, Mother, how do you find it where you are?
It's 1:00.
Tell me about it. And she looked at me and she said, looked at me. See, here I'm in the moment, right? She said to me, Julianne, read Plato. So that to me, of course, I don't know how many people out there have read Plato's Republic, but if you've gone to college, you probably have, and some high schools teach it as well. So I thought of the cave allegory, which is where individuals who, I think there was some guys there that were all chained up in a cave, and there was a fire there. And the only thing they were able to see in the outside world were these shadows that would come by that were caused as a result of the fire. And so one of the prisoners escaped. And when he got outside the cave, he was just completely blown away because he realized at that moment that what he had thought was real most of his life was in fact not real. So that's what I sort of took my mother's words to say, and just sort of condensing it. But your point about kindness and love, I get that over and over and over again. Jennifer and I do in our sessions. When people go to life between lives, or they call it the other side of the veil, or whatever the case is, we see, and of course people going to past lives too, but we will often take them through their death and then help them go to the light if we see there's a disconnect there. And not one person has ever said, oh no, this is bad. This is really bad. They're all like, no, I want to stay. So I just thought I would share that with you.
Well, I appreciate that. And also, yeah, that's actually, I want to highlight that about how many experiencers actually argue and fight to stay there. And sometimes they're kicked out against their will, kicking and screaming. I mean, right. and several of them I know have, when they have woken up in the hospital or in the ambulance or whatnot, and they were angry, and it took them months or years to forgive their care team or themselves or God and say, all right, I'm here. I accept that I'm here. I'll make the most of this. And so, they call this a school or a place for learning. And something that I wanted to go back on too was when I mentioned about how there's a lot of beliefs out there, like in the New Age communities, and some of them, you might have heard of toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. And so
Yeah.
in this whole journey, because in readings for a time, I actually in those communities, I was kind of exploring all those as well. So for a time, I thought like if I had a reading, well, if everything is just happening as according to plan and and everything is perfect all the time, that I guess I don't really have to put much effort into life, which isn't how I see it now. But in that process, when I would have a reading, and let's say it was a psychic reading, and she mentioned like a possible future, I was like, well, wow, I really love that. I'm excited about that. But then with that belief, I thought, well, it will just happen. If it's meant to happen, then I don't have to really try. And after a while of being told about these potential things happening and then not happening, and I was like, it was it was my learning process of I wonder if that belief that everything will just happen without have to try, if reality is a little more complicated, like you do have to try. And so it's a paradox because it's like we have our free
Right.
will and there's a higher power, and everyone has free will, and so it's not just what I want, it's how everyone is flowing. And so in that process, I think I'm at a healthy place now of understanding that certain things are like meant to happen, and some things are sort of meant to happen, and some things are really iffy, and it's all depending on our free will and soul contracts and life plans, and it's a whole fascinating area. And so but ultimately I've learned like the biggest thing is to trust my own self, not just my mind, but my intuition or gut. And in that process, everything smoothed out. So if anyone listening is also like in that process of confusion in life, and I thought this was going to happen just because it's just a matter of feeling how you feel inside and operating from that. Of course, always with kindness and whatnot. But like if you are, if you have a reading and you're told that about a person, and perhaps a possible partner or friend or business associate, and in the reading you're told, well, this will happen one way, but yet what happens is different. Simply follow how you actually feel, because everything will work out. And in that process, there are a few people that I was associating with because I thought in my mind for other reasons that I had to, and then I realized, well, no, I don't actually feel it, and so I'll move on in this other direction. And so, actually, trusting ourselves is a huge step in that process. And yeah,
I think it's so amazing how just in the past few years, really, the sharing and the discussing of the NDEs and the integration of that information into someone's worldview has really normalized it, because I can't believe how many people that I know and have known for so many years, some of them have had NDEs and they never mentioned it. It was like a taboo thing, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, when I was 8 I had an NDE, I drowned. When I was this, oh yeah, just 2 years ago, and it's like it's already brought it to the surface of being able to discuss these things amongst a wide variety of individuals. Before it was just, you just didn't talk about it. The only person who knew was your family and your doctor, something like that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that the collective consciousness has evolved to this point right now today, to where it's needed, and so it's coming forth. And I'm wondering what has been the consensus for you, Ned? What have people been saying to you in your Facebook site, for example, what are you finding is really changing amongst the people who have not had NDEs?
Well, and so in the group, a lot of people who post have not had NDEs, but they have the questions like what you're saying about. And so they're asking they're asking sometimes about the future, or sometimes about like if they were raised in religion, am I going to end up in hell? And then a lot of experiencers will chime in the comments and explain, that isn't anything to really worry about. Like ultimately, like of course, and this is something I want to talk about is accountability, because you know in the world of the beliefs out there, where some people are saying that there's only love and light, there is no hell and whatnot. There is a truth in that, but that's not the whole truth. And so, like you can't just go around hurting people and expect that you'll be on a cloud in heaven the whole like it's our actions matter. And so
Yeah.
and I've heard over and over in from experiencers, or even in mediumship readings, that there is accountability. It's not a punishment. It's not like, well, you, let's say for even a person who did something as drastic as kill someone, or a soldier who followed orders and he shot a person and killed a bunch of people, as is common in war. And if they worry about that, like, am I going to end up in a punishment, in hell forever? And it's not about that. It's um, uh, so a lot of people have these questions about how it all really works, and a lot of people are wondering, like in the future, are we almost to Armageddon or whatnot? And a lot of experiencers will chime in and say it isn't really about all that either. There are possible scenarios which can happen depending on our free will, depending on, on how we treat each other, how certain people who are, let's say, in key positions of power or influence at a certain time, depending on their free will choices, it could drastically impact, things in infinite directions. And so, including, for example, this is something I love, like ultimately, some people are worried about nuclear war and, in terms of blowing each other up. And I have seen a lot of experiencers, and just there's evidence in the UFO community. It's all out there about how, over the decades, there were times where craft, they flew over the missile silos of the nuclear warheads and disabled them. And so, and I love hearing about and learning things like that, because it's almost like there is, like we said, there's a higher power. There are other civilizations with technologies which are way more advanced than us, and who sometimes will step in and do things, and who are watching us to see what we'll do, in terms of as a humanity, which is based up on all of our individual choices. Are we going to, how quickly are we going to advance into this more loving and evolved state, or stay kind of in a slower learning path of just like, ego, and these people are bad, these people are good, and will fight each other or will imprison each other in camps. This kind of behavior, it's not um, set in stone. And some people wonder, well, if everything is happening according to a plan, does that mean that God is in support of what's happening? And I've heard over and over from experiencers, what's happening on Earth is almost all because of us. And so it's people who are either doing the good things or the bad things. And it's people who are doing the loving things or the selfish things. And the more we take responsibility for, our gift of free will and use it in more loving ways, as they all talk about, things get happier. So I hope that answered your question. I know it went all over the place.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
So, like, have you seen a change since you have actually been gathering data and research? Have you seen anything shift within these experiences?
Yeah. And so in the first one, the top two commonalities, or my favorites, I guess, it is the message that what we do here matters. And also in that we have help, that our loved ones and guides and angels, they're all real. And you don't have to be a Christian or anything. Like, there are beings that, that other religions have also picked up on. I think in Islam they call them some other names, and perhaps other philosophies have other names, but that we do have help, we do have guides. And when you see people, or a situation that you see other people who are either struggling a lot or they're having great success, and you wonder about that, as I'm curious about everything. I've learned that there's reasons behind everything, and so they could also be spiritual reasons. And so if a person has helped out a lot and has a good heart, and either in this life or other lifetimes, they will often be blessed and kind of protected. And there are people who you see just constantly in struggle after struggle, and often there's a spiritual reason behind that, and isn't about a punishment. It could be a learning process. It could be the fact that they also, perhaps harmed some people, and they're in the process of having that balanced out. But we can't ever know. There are people who have handicaps and whatnot, and it could be because they chose, like, I want to increase the challenges, so therefore increase the maturity and the level that I've grown afterwards. Because when things are easy, we don't really grow. And so it's almost like if you're in a gym and you see a person who has always, like, has amazing home and family and everything's always easy. Like, well, if you're in a gym and you pick up the light weights and you're just kind of you aren't truly working hard, which is okay in its own way, compared to a person who picks up the heavy weight and is really putting a lot of effort into it. And at the end result, the person who put a lot of the effort is going to grow a lot faster. And so, and then the other question about any trends. Well, a trend that I'll add that isn't a good one, or it makes it more complicated for all of us, is AI. Because of, like, I'm seeing a lot of AI videos who, people are posting them. And sometimes the people who are posting them are not actual either real people. They could be bots or spammers, but it's, they're turning it into, a for profit. There are people in other countries, especially like in Asia, who are setting up farms of these accounts and making up a lot of videos with AI voices, AI storylines, etc., and kind of flooding the algorithm. And so, it isn't really a huge problem so far. And so in my group, we have a new rule that we discourage or prevent approving. If you post AI video, it has to really add something. If it's just a typical AI a video, we decline it because we value actual people, actual real stories. But also just a trend like I'm seeing, a lot of people who are posting about what they experienced in the car crash or in the accident. But then I think it's a slower process, but I'm seeing it in some people of experiencers or those who have learned from them who say, okay, well, now what? Like, I'm tired of talking about the accident. Like, what do we do now? And that's what I feel is most important, because if we're here to help each other and to support each other, we see that what's happening in the news and in politics, which often it looks like the opposite of that. And so, how do we actually walk this walk and do this? And so, experiences happen to people of all beliefs, of all political parties, etc. And so, really, it's about just remember that love and how to live it, like whoever's in front of you, either in person or on an internet chat. So a great story. Rudy Rudinsky, he grew up in Texas, and trying to recall, I think he was in San Antonio. I can't recall, but in Texas, he grew up as a Baptist, and but in his childhood, he was actually taught about how Russia's are communists and communists are evil, about how homosexuals are evil, about how Democrats are evil, and so and there are a lot of people in places like Texas or others who have these beliefs. And he was in a car accident, a major car accident. And in his experience, God told him, like, directly and lovingly, that he loves all, he loves everyone. And these artificial labels are so insignificant. And so Rudy, when he came back, he now helps a lot of people who were like him to kind of outgrow beliefs like that. And I think about that a lot because it's not about the politics. It's not about the countries or immigration status. Like if all of these are like our human constructs, a lot of experiencers have said if you think back to how the natives lived, like when there's a lot less of all these kind of labels on things, you're just a person. You are white eagle. I'm wolf or whatnot, and we just support each other. Like that's a more natural way of living, and it's almost like that is even encouraged by, or is just more natural compared to how we are now. And that gets into, I have a friend, Andrew Bauer, and I don't know if you've interviewed him, but if you haven't, I recommend him in the future. And we'll talk about this later. But he had several NDEs, and he has learned a lot, and so he saw that in the future, in the next few hundred years on Earth, the main thing that humanity has to kind of outgrow are a few things. So in the process of maturing into a more loving civilization, which I want to add, like you've heard of the 5D, right? So many people are talking about how
Yeah, I mean, we're going in and out of it constantly. That's part of what's making me crazy. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, exactly, because and this is the reason that it's important to talk about because in 2012, or I think even in 2000, everyone kind of had these ideas that in 2000 we're going to end up in a whole new world, and then in 2012, it was like, okay, on that date, at the end of uh, December 21st, we're going to wake up and it'd be a whole new place and it's going to be all love and beautiful. And then no, we wake up and we're still the same. And so every single time, like there are people who are like, it's almost here, like we're going to be, it's everything will shift.
Right.
Yeah. And so, it's this whole thing because in the spiritual community, you will see how, you know, just like everywhere else, you're going to find a lot of fluff and then the actual uh,
Event.
real stuff.
Yeah.
And in that process, and so he talked about, Andrew says in his NDE, he was shown, and I've heard others that echo this, that humanity is on a long-term process of evolution, and we have evolved a lot already. Um,
Yeah.
but in this process, we need to outgrow a few things. And one of them is money in terms of like right now, most people are working in jobs that they're either don't like or are just ambivalent about because they have to make money in order to pay their rent or mortgage and just survive. And then you look at the people who have all the wealth and the power. And right now, they, as opposed to trying to use that to help humanity and kind of advance us all, they are focused on how to make more money and power and focused on only, more homes, mansions and yachts and this whole thing, which, material things are not a bad thing, but if all humanity is currently focused on is just kind of this hamster wheel, and people are more suffering every year, homelessness and poverty, etc. This isn't a intelligent solution. And so eventually, with enough people who come together and say, we want to change, we want to advance to a better way, we need to overcome this whole thing about money because there are better ways. And I think in Star Trek, it's kind of a role model or a template of future ideas. And I've heard some NDEers who say that Star Trek kind of reminds them of how they see things. And also the whole thing about right now, most everyone is focused on their own individualistic pursuits in terms and they're often at cross purposes. And he said that in the future, eventually enough of us will realize if we kind of help each other out more, we can accomplish so much more. And so, and I think the third thing was about religion, because right now, I just heard from my friend in Texas, and she said that as of, I think it was today maybe, that all the schools in Texas have to put up the Ten
Oh, yeah.
Commandments. And I
Yeah.
think in Oklahoma and other
Yeah.
places,
They Oklahoma was the first, I think, to do that.
and this whole thing about it's almost like our Santa Claus or our tooth fairy. It's like yes, religion has some value for some people, but also there's a lot of like things that we can and should outgrow. And so it's this whole thing about humanity waking up. A lot of it right now has kept us kind of asleep. It's just that we have our jobs and then our Netflix, and we just are in this kind of bubble. And as we mature out of that, and it could take civil unrest or natural disasters over time, these kind of more harder experiences, while they're not as comfortable, they will help us to evolve faster.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I have my own feelings and opinions about what I see going on right now. And from a loving perspective, I have to say that I think the more of us that have the ability to shine the light on those individuals who are perpetuating power and money as being the be all end all, uh, more power to us, because I believe that part of our jobs as light workers that have chosen to come to Earth right now, it really and truly is to turn that light on, to shine the light on all the shadows that currently exist. And it's really funny because if you kind of sit back and you look at our political world as an observer, trying not to get terribly emotional about it, but trying to stay objective, when I do that, I see that those individuals who believe that power and money is everything. I see that coming from politicians on both sides. Sort of interesting because they're all running around scurrying like cockroaches that you turn the light on at night. They just run. And it's like I almost see that they can sense that they're beginning to lose power. They're beginning to lose that hold that they have on citizens and the way people think. And they see that changing. And so therefore we see a lot of those individuals, the pendulum swinging to the extreme. Like they're like, oh my God, we have got to get schools to get the 10 Commandments up on the chalkboards. Oh my God, we can't allow flag burning anymore. Oh my, so that it's all reaction, a reaction, a reaction. And it's all fear-based. It's kind of interesting to watch. So
It is all, yeah, and also because and that energy and that perspective that they have is so foreign or almost opposite to what people learn in their NDEs. And so hypocrisy is a big thing. And hypocrisy was actually one of the reasons that when I was, before I learned all this, when I was in high school, I was also a big reason I thought about suicide, because I was like, just the level of hypocrisy on the earth, like the people, a lot of them who say they're doing, you know, the good things. Well, you look at all the scandals and whatnot, and a lot of them, it's like the most, the people who are kind of supposed to be the ones protecting are often the ones who are not, or doing the opposite. And so, and the people who are the religious people who are trying to implement a form of Christian nationalism are, hypocritical in how a lot of them are in their own scandals, or and yeah, it's this whole thing, and it's almost like I have a friend, and she's a multiple experiencer herself, and she talked about how it's impossible to save anyone. Like you said, all we can do, and perhaps our purpose, is to just speak up and share what we have seen, or what we have learned, because people are going to, it takes time for a lot of people to kind of learn these things, especially because in places in like Oklahoma or Texas, there are not a lot of experiencers or groups that are in public that are talking about these things. And you know, and and this is an interesting kind of a corollary. Is I grew up in Silicon Valley, and I'm here now, but in places which are very blue, or intellectual, there's often this kind of um, a sense of, it's a different personality compared to what's like in Oklahoma or Texas. And when you come at it from a perspective from NDEs, we're all loved, we're all in a family. And so if like there is a lot of intellectual arrogance, if people who are either very smart or who live in upscale coastal areas, um, and uh, and so both sides have learning here in terms of if the people who are very smart gain more humility and actually realize the value in like a farmer type of a person, and that we're all here to support each other, it would help things. And so it's a big picture evolution.
Uh, so I think we're going to need to do a part 2.
I'd love that.
Are you up for that? I mean, I'm sure Jennifer too. We just have so many more questions because
Yes.
I want to ask you, what are some, like, how do you gather your research and your data? I'm sorry, your data through your research. I want to ask, like, what are some of the craziest NDEs or most effective NDEs you've seen? I want to ask you about contracts. There's still
Yeah.
so I want to talk about, astrology and how that works, and then more about the shift from physics standpoint and going in and out of dimensions and like all that we didn't even get to.
And I've got that many questions too.
I love that.
There's more, but again, I just think that you are such an intelligent guy, and you, oh my God, what you're doing for all of us. First of all, I have to tell you, thank you from my heart. Thank you, because you are exactly what is needed. Yeah. The fact that if we all died tomorrow, and the legacy or the epitaph that you left was that kindness is the most important thing, that in itself is so powerful, and it's true. It's a truism. So just thank you so much. And I have to make a list of questions to ask next time. It's going to get really deep next time.
I love that.
Jennifer, do you want to ask your final question, or do you want to save that for next time? Or
I feel like I want to save it for next time because I think that Ned has left the listeners with a lot to think about thus far. There's a lot of information packed into this episode, and thank you, Ned. You really it just flowed, a lot of information. I can tell that you're very versed. You've done a lot of speaking about this, and it's really evident through this whole interview. And I really appreciate you. Thank you very much.
I love that.
And I love that you're a scientist. Mm-hmm. Like this is like the perfect scenario in my book. Because I am, I try. It's just hilarious watching me trying to read physics. But I try all the time. I make a sad attempt to understand it, but it's fascinating stuff. I mean, connecting the two, connecting the metaphysical with the physical.
Because and ultimately, everything is physics. Like if you've heard of Mellon Thomas Benedict, who's an experiencer, you've heard of him, mm-hmm. And he would often also talk about it like that, like like just as X-rays and microwaves are real. I mean, when people die and they watching themselves from the top of the room, that is all physics. Like, and so imagine, our science in the future when we can understand how that all works and how, like, there are people who are trying to measure a soul, like in weight or what kind of energy it is. And like it's not religion. It's not like these are universal. And so I'm excited. And so let's plan it in the future. And
yeah. Okay. So to all of the viewers who have stuck with this conversation, thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to Souls on Tap. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you will never miss a drop of wisdom. We'd love for you to share any thoughts you have and add any type of healing modalities that you'd like for us to showcase. Also, if you've had any NDEs, please let us know that in the comments as well. Because remember, we are here for you. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected, and we'll see you on Souls on Tap.